If you're watching this video, you're probably pursuing a career in animation or even just figuring out how to make art for a living. Trust me, I've been there. It wasn't the easiest or straightest of paths to a career in animation for me. For most of my teenage years and early 20s, I kept searching for the career in art that was right for me. I interned in almost every art field I could find and tried out most available art career paths. At many points, I was lost and unsure of what direction to go in, but I eventually ended up working in animation and have been for over a decade. And currently, I am a visual development artist in TV and have worked for studios such as Disney TV, DreamWorks TV, and Nickelodeon. Let's rewind all the way back to 2010 when I was in high school. I grew up in New York. The New York animation industry at that time was basically non-existent. It was more of a fine art scene, so working in animation was never a goal of mine back then. I tried out so many different career paths in high school, from interning at the Metropolitan Museum of Art to doing graphic design work for the Parks Department and fine art at the Cooper Union program. I took so many classes in figurative drawing. There was a lot of time spent there. Though I can't say I learned that much other than getting lots of observation mileage in. Just like when I drew other people in the subway during long commutes or during history class in the set of my notes. I wasn't thinking critically about drawing. In all those art classes, I hadn't yet found a teacher who could do figure construction from imagination. Drawing from observation was more easily accessible and therefore the more prevalent way of teaching. So looking back at it, these fan art classes weren't an efficient way to learn. But despite that, in those early years, my passion for art did grow since I was spending so much time on it. And I will always be thankful to my high school art, drawing, and ceramic teachers for that. Mr. Egoff and Miss Aisbrook were very kind and caring people. My parents were always encouraging too. They believed in me with whatever I wanted to learn, even if it was art. Growing up, I saw my dad work in architecture and my mom work in fashion, and while I admired both of my parents for their careers, both paths were extremely technical in a way that didn't interest me. And they agreed. They didn't want me to pursue architecture either, which was fine with me. So because of their own art backgrounds, I think that is why they were so open-minded about me pursuing a career in art. What I learned from this period in my life was that I had to discover an art path that was right for me. I chose a college in the Midwest, Washington University in St. Louis. I didn't have the courage to go all the way to California, and honestly, I hadn't even heard of schools like CalArts or Art Center that had animation and concept art programs. California just felt so far from home. Again, I tried to pursue art as much as possible. I became known for designing logos for on-campus groups. I designed logos for like a salsa team, an environmental group, a spoken poetry group. I mean, even now I'm contacted to create logos, but it's just not applicable to my career path anymore. I also interned at a social marketing firm, a graphic design firm, and motion graphics studio. My internships in advertising motion graphics were the most artistic and creative I'd had so far, but I came to the realization that I was seeking knowledge on how to improve my drawing skills. These types of firms worked with commercial companies and relied on them for revenue. Each project was more about working as efficiently as possible to get a product out the door, which could be anything from packaging art, brand identity, or even a TV commercial. Once in a while you might get to draw, but a lot of your time would be spent arranging beer bottle imagery for a brewing company or perfecting the logo for a pet food. I grew to realize satisfying a commercial client and working to challenge yourself to grow artistically in a 2D drawing sense were two completely different things. Not only that, but I also worked with a fine arts fiber artist who made pieces of paper the size of rooms. It was kind of cool. We wore rain boots in a giant paper vat to create paper. That was an experience. And I even created a group to display student artwork on campus. So hearing those lists of things, can you guess what I was like at that time? I was all over the place, like a typical young person who hadn't yet discovered their focus in life. One of these side jobs in college did lead me to my goal eventually. I became the illustration editor of our school's political magazine, also known as Whooper, Washington University Political Review. I don't quite remember how this happened during my freshman year, especially because I actually wasn't that interested in politics, but I think no one else applied for the job and that's how I got it. It was through that political illustration editor job that I was able to meet seniors at my college who were working on building their own illustration portfolios. One of them was Carter Maloof, who graduated and worked at Nickelodeon. I reached out to her via Facebook and let her know I was applying. She was able to recommend me to the internship program when I applied. After a phone interview with someone who worked at Nickelodeon where they asked me basic questions, and I had a second phone call with the person who would be my boss in the internship. Having done the interviews, all there was to do was just wait nervously, and then I got an acceptance email. Well, actually, I got mistakenly sent a rejection email and then an acceptance email. Finally, I was in the animation industry in the summer of my junior year. That internship at Nickelodeon was one of the highlights of my early professional life. So when you intern at Nickelodeon, there's basically a couple different departments that you can choose from. You can help with events, you can intern on a show. For example, at the time, you could have interned on Korra, SpongeBob, which means you're kind of like helping out, listening in on all the meetings and learning from all the different departments. And for my internship, I chose working in the Nick Digital department. Nick Digital was the in-house unit that helped all the shows with FX, 2D, and 3D graphics. I liked it because you could actually work hands-on on shows, whereas when you work on a specific show, you weren't allowed to work on any of the artistic projects on it. So basically, this was like a non-artistic internship. You didn't necessarily need a portfolio to apply for it. Ernest Chan was my boss, and he was such a nice guy that taught me how to use the basics of the 3D program Lightwave. And through that, I even got my first television credit on the TV show Tough Puppy. I was so proud of it. Each department had 2 interns, and I worked closely with my friend Liz Chun, who is my friend to this very day and is also a writer in animation. We worked on shows like Tough Puppy. I also did some stuff on Dora the Explorer too. That was a really fun time. In my spare time, I was able to show my work to all the amazing and kind Nickelodeon artists. I wanted to do a special shout out to Liz Crescent, Stephen Hurt, and Gordon Hammond, among all the other amazing people at Nickelodeon who were so generous with their time and carefully drew over my work. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. It was only through drawovers and direct feedback that I was able to see what I could improve. They also sometimes gave me homework to work on or tips on how to improve my drawing on the side. It felt like I was living in a fog, and I could slowly start to see the art knowledge as the fog receded and I began to learn more. But it still felt like there was so much covered by the fog. Looking back on it, objectively, I think I may have been one of the interns with the worst art portfolios. I was so far away from the goal of getting hired, but I realized I could get to that next level if I was more deliberate about spending my free time doing art, and then I could catch up to everyone else. Like Confucius once said, it does not matter how slowly you go as long as you do not stop. And me, being a super stubborn person, decided it was time to get better at drawing intentionally. But while that internship bubble was fun while it lasted, the internship ended and I had to go back to school. My new goal was to find a way back into the animation industry as a working professional, but that was way harder than it sounded. At the time, the unfortunate reality was that I wasn't good enough to get hired at Nickelodeon, so I spent my senior year furiously drawing, trying to will myself to get better. And, if this story was a magic fairy story, I would magically get better in a year, but that's not how getting better at drawing works. It took a lot of time, and I couldn't do that in a year. My mom knew how much I loved that internship, and being the internet sleuth that she is, used Google to help me discover Motivarti, a program that used to exist that connected students with working artists. I applied and was lucky that I got accepted to do a visual development painting mentorship with Leighton Hickman. Leighton Hickman was at the time a visual development artist at DreamWorks Future. The mentorship quite literally changed my life. I was able to create my first visual development portfolio with his feedback and paintovers. The way the mentorship worked was that I chose a story, I think it was like Baba Yaga's story, and I created several visual development paintings for it, 2 prop callouts, one like a special goblet and a house design that I did a turnaround of. I mean, looking back on it, I feel bad that I wasn't able to make more awesome stuff with such a good mentor, but that was the level I was at. While I did spend a lot of time on the paintings, I still think the overall level of the paintings was very beginner. Despite that, Leighton was always very positive, and he suggested taking classes at the Concept Design Academy after the mentorship was over. With that newly created portfolio in hand, and my senior year in college coming to an end, I applied to my dream career in animation through internships at, the major studios. Life had its own plans, and once again, I got rejected from all the visual development and animation internships. It really sucked, but I was still determined. So I graduated college with no job in hand. But this time I had a plan. Move to LA and take classes at Concept Design Academy to learn all the skills I was lacking in order to become a hireable artist. Funny story, the signups for the classes went up so quickly that I even got rejected just for classes that I selected. I count my lucky stars that I was able to get into a landscape painting class that Leighton taught that summer, and some more art classes at 3 Kick Studio next door. So I moved out to California with no job and no car, just with the plan to take some classes. I was on my own, but also free from the set curriculum of college, and I was ready to soak up new knowledge like a sponge. It should have been one of the hardest times of my life, but with the support of my parents and my stubbornly optimistic attitude, I look back on this time with very fond memories of friends I made and art I did. From that plein air class I took with Leighton, I met some of my friends that I have till this very day. One of them, Fareed Sandoval, even officiated my wedding last year. During this time period, I was admittedly a bit lost. I was optimistic, but besides working on my portfolio all the time, I was still looking for a direction to go in. When at the time, I'd been rejected from animation studios, so I can't work in animation right now. So I interned at Gallery Nucleus, a local art gallery for animation artists. And through the Gallery Nucleus internship, I was lucky enough to meet some people who are my good friends to this very day. Steven Chung, a board artist in animation, and he eventually introduced me to Michelle Lin, an awesome artist who is actually one of my bosses at my current job today. So another thing I did while I was in LA was go to CTN, an animation expo. I met up with my college friend Chris Hole, who was also interested in working in animation. We both showed our portfolios hoping to get hired. Showing my portfolio to professionals in person was a humbling experience, and it was clear I had a lot to work on. My one saving grace was the plein air notebook I brought with me from all the gouache studies I had done while I was traveling around LA trying to get to know the new city I was in. The professionals really liked seeing that, because I think in the plein air notebook, I was painting lighting more realistically and I hadn't yet learned how to do that in digital painting. So having not gotten any job leads from CTN, I continued to try to intern at various places and work on my art portfolio. I also worked some odd art jobs, which I was only able to get by asking my teachers and classmates. As an introvert, I had to be extremely social and go out of my way to ask people these questions. My go-to question was to ask people who worked in the industry if they knew anyone hiring for freelance work. This question worked so well for me because of two things. Number one, it broke the awkwardness of asking someone to review your portfolio first. There's just this time period when you show someone your portfolio and they just want to give you honest feedback, but they don't know if you can take it and they don't know if you're looking for work. So it's just kind of for me, I felt like that's an awkward interaction that I wanted to avoid. And if they didn't like me or my work, they could just answer they didn't know anyone hiring, and that was an easy way to end the conversation. Number two, if they were interested in hiring me, they could ask for my website or keep my name in mind, even if they didn't know anyone who was hiring at the moment. This question worked successfully 2 times. Patrick Ballesteros was a professional concept artist in one of my classes, and he was the first one to hire me to animate his character designs for an educational app. That job gave me so much confidence, and I'm so grateful to him for that learning experience. The second time was with the late Gary Myers, a wonderful art center teacher who I took classes with at a smaller studio. He recommended me to a concept art job for another educational app at the studio 2-Bit Circus. At that job, I was working with actual art center students, which felt so surreal. That job, I didn't learn as much from professionally, drawing-wise, since there wasn't really an art director directing the project, but just being in the same room as other artists who had portfolios that were amazing, it just gave me so much confidence and motivation to move forward and keep working on my work. I also interned at Favilli Studios, which is a theme park company. I just cold emailed and they responded to me out of the blue. I soon discovered theme park work was really different from animation, but I did learn a lot of technical perspective skills from the kind artists there. Some of my mentors from that studio, Eugene Huang and Feilin Huang, I'm still in touch with them to this very day. Not only that, I blindly sent emails to studios big and small asking if they were hiring. Since I was in LA, it was easier to hear of those smaller studios, whereas if I was out of town, I probably wouldn't know the names of some of those studios. I ended up getting offered a small gig at Wild Canary doing Mucinex commercials, that like big animated booger that like has the commercials for cold medicine. So I did some of those commercials with Paul DeMeyer, who was my art director. The Mucinex commercial was my very first job, where I was able to do visual development for a commercial project working directly with an art director. And coincidentally, this is also the studio I work at now. But I didn't start working there immediately after that job. It was my first time seeing the process of visual development for a project from start to finish, and I really loved it a lot. Coincidentally, my friend Michelle also worked at Wild Canary on a TV show there, and she introduced me to another one of my good friends, Angela Lee. Angela and I both lived close to each other, so Angela was so generous. Angela drove me to the office every time I had to go because I didn't have a car at the time. And each of these jobs, no matter how big or small, I celebrated them with gusto because I was one step closer to my goal. A year into taking classes at CDA, one of my friends, Hillary Bradfield from the Nickelodeon Internship, invited me on a hike with her friend Bridget Orr. Bridget worked at Nickelodeon on a show called Breadwinners. This didn't come into play until a year later. By a huge stroke of luck, they were hiring for designers. Bridget recommended me. And without that recommendation, like Carter's recommendation for the Nickelodeon internship, I'm not sure I would have even been considered. The first step for artist positions in TV is usually an art test. This test was in Flash, a program I'd never used before, and it was 2 background designs and 1 background painting based off of an existing layout. I spent a good chunk of time studying the show style, but looking back on it, I realized I still made some little small perspective errors with ellipses. Luckily, the test was good enough to go on to the in-person interview with the line producer and the art director Jonathan Ranoni, where they ask you some basic questions about yourself and the show. A few weeks after interviewing, I finally got the news that I was accepted. When I finally got into the industry, I felt like a huge weight finally lifted off of my shoulders. So that is kind of my path from being a kind of a clueless high school student to eventually getting a job in animation. And I couldn't have done it without all the talented people who I was lucky enough to walk beside on my journey. While it may seem like a lot, this was actually a really condensed version of my experiences. At any point in my journey, I could have stopped and said, hey, this is enough. I could have worked in museums, in advertising, or motion graphics, and those are all great career paths. But while it may have been right for another person, it didn't feel exactly right for me. I didn't always know this, but I learned along the journey that what I wanted to learn was more about the art of drawing, the art of painting, the art of seeing, being able to draw from your imagination. And I trusted my gut instinct to lead me to where I am today. I have a career where every day I learn more about creating something from my mind. And I have made so many mistakes, but I've also learned so much more. Part of the journey is making those mistakes and learning from them. So no matter how far your goals seem for you at the moment, remember, it's not how the journey starts, but how it ends. Every journey begins with the first step. It doesn't matter how long it takes to get there. You have to believe in yourself, and I know you can do it. And I also want to do a future draw-over video, so if you want your work to be possibly included for a free draw-over, just fill out the form in the description below. And also, just feel free to ask any questions you want answered in the comments for a future Q&A video about art. And here's a short video of my dad and my journey in his words. Hope you enjoy.
You walk into the parlor door in the browser, and you just walked in with such determination. You said, I'm going to become an artist. And you just walked in with that determination. And I shook my head. I go, what? What's going on? So I went back and I talked to your teachers. She's young. She's just going through a phase. I think that's the teacher that inspired you to, about art, I don't know if it was I don't know if it was your homeroom teacher or your art teacher, but she says, no, don't worry. It's okay, And then, like 15 years later, driving you home from St. Louis University, you sit in the back and say, Daddy, I'm going to California. You said that. I said, what? You says, I got to learn you got CDA concept, Design Academy or something. And I was shocked 15 years later. And I was very surprised that about 3 weeks later, you headed out to California with no apartment, no nothing, no job, no boyfriend, no friends. And I think you said alumni friend helped you look for an apartment. You got an apartment, you got a job, you got the school, you met new friends, and creative, beautiful friends like Fareed, and of course it goes back. He's been a long time, and of course 10 years later you got a car, an apartment, great job, great friends, and a new husband.
Oh, thanks, Dad.
Yeah, it's amazing that you did all that stuff out there all by yourself. So you have great, good skills, vocational skills and social skills to make you a success.
Oh,
and I'm grateful that I have such a great daughter. Thank you very much.